recap from this last video. We talked about how when we get to transition metals, they are inner electrons. They're part of what we call the d orbital. And they do not fill out the outermost shell in a Bohr model. They fill out an inner shell. So we're going to do an example using bromine this time so that you can see how this works. Again, just to recap. So when we are looking at this, the first two, to the left side of the periodic table, the first two columns are what we call the s orbital elements. And to the right-hand side of the periodic table, to the right-hand side of the transition metals, these are what we call the p block elements. And they behave normally, no exceptions, no special rules. It starts to get a little complicated when we get to these d block elements. So beginning with element number 21, that's when things get complicated. So I'm going to go ahead and start by doing bromine. I'm going to go ahead and draw my circles for my Bohr model. I've got my first shell, my second shell. I know that I'm going to draw 4 shells because if we look, bromine is in the first, second, third, fourth row, which means that there are going to be 4 shells that are used total. 3 and 4. It's actually a very, very terrible drawing. I'm sorry, I'm actually just going to redo this, maybe make it a little bit better. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so remember that when we're filling it out, we fill it out normally up until we get to element 20, which is calcium. So I'm going to go ahead and begin filling this out. Remember that bromine is actually element, I'm going to pull up a bigger periodic table. Bromine is actually element 35. Sorry, it's all scribbled on from class earlier. So we're going in and we're filling it up to 35 electrons on the Bohr model. So again, right here, bromine, this is where we're looking, element number 35. We need 35 electrons on this Bohr model. I'm going to begin filling this out by putting 2 electrons on that first shell. So I've got 1, 2, and then that corresponds with the 2 on my first row. I'm going to go through and I'm going to continue filling this out up until I get to element 20. So I have 20 electrons on here total. If I go through, I've basically covered up until calcium. I can start crossing these off. Basically, I've done all of this and I've done calcium. And now I'm at the D block. I'm at scandium. And this is where once I hit those transition metals, I am no longer going to continue filling out this 4th shell. What I end up doing is I go back in and I fill out this 3rd shell. So this entire row of transition metals is actually going to fill out the 3rd shell, not the 4th shell. So we see that even though the 3rd shell can only hold 8 valence electrons, it can actually hold 18 total electrons when we go back in and fill out these transition metals. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to fill out all 10 because again, I'm trying to get all the way down to bromine. So. And when it comes to drawing these inner electrons, there's really no specific pattern, at least not that I've taught. It's just wherever you can find room at that point. So now we see that we've completely filled out all the way up until zinc. So that 3rd shell is completely filled out and we're getting to gallium. When we get to gallium, you notice that this is in the P block. And so this means that things begin to go back to normal. Starting with gallium, we're going to go back in and begin filling out the 4th shell again. So we see that gallium is filled out. Let's fill out germanium. There we go. Let's fill out arsenic. and selenium. And now let's fill out bromine. Oops. And there we go. And if we were to do a count, we would see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 valence electrons. And oh, look, bromine has 7 valence electrons. And if we were to do a total count, which I'm not going to do, we would actually see and count that we have 35 total electrons on this Bohr model. And again, we could continue on. We could fill out one more electron for krypton if we were to keep going, and then we could add a 5th shell and do the exact same thing. This time, if we were to go through the transition metals for this 5th row, these transition metals that are in the 5th row of the periodic table would fill in the 4th shell on a Bohr model. So again, these transition metals just go back a shell and fill them in. And then once you get back to these P block elements, you go back to filling out the outermost shell until you have a total of up to 8 valence electrons or less. That's all I have. So let me know if you have any questions, and I hope this makes sense.